Hey Linux learners, it's George, and it's been a while since I've made a follow-up to my SELinux video. Here it is. This is officially part 2 of SELinux. Now, one thing I'm going to do, just a little quick caveat, is when I go to the demonstration phase, I am going to get rid of my camera, get my mug off the screen because it just gets in the way. So for now, I thought I'd greet you, say hello, thanks for coming to the channel and learning with me. If you can, fire up your virtual machine or whatever you got, an instance, and work with me so you can actually learn. Okay, so this is part 2 of SELinux. Last time we briefly discussed what SELinux was, and SELinux is basically security enhanced Linux that allows access controls on your services in Linux. Now, you might recall that with a user, you can set specific permissions like read, write, execute, and all that kind of stuff on a person. Well, SELinux kind of does that for your services, right? So, like HTTPD or whatever service you have, it allows it to or gives certain access controls to be able to go into certain files and use certain files and processes. So that's in a nutshell and a high level overview of what it is. So in today's video, we're going to talk about how to set the policy, how to enforce it, disable it, and look at the configuration file. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera. Haven't done that yet. Let's see if I can figure it out. There we go. Still recording. Awesome. So if you look up on my screen here, I am logged in to the, let's just get out of that though. Let's CD all the way back to root. Okay, let me clear everything out. Oop, that's not how you spell clear. And go back home, clear it all out. I like having a nice new workspace. Okay, so again, SELinux just defines controls for applications, processes, and files. So when a process attempts to access an object like a file, then the security enhanced Linux will run a check against the access vector cache. And if all's good, SELinux will grant permission to that object, and if it doesn't, it will deny it. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what SELinux is. What you need to be concerned about is how to understand the 3 different modes it can be in and how to get in and out of those modes, right? So the first command you need to learn is SEStatus. If you want to know what the status of SELinux is on the machine you're working on, you just type that in and hit enter. And from here we can glean a lot of information. You can see that the SELinux status is enabled, so it is on. It's the only 2 options are enabled or disabled. Excuse me. And it shows you the mount point, how to access the configuration or where the configuration files live at SELinux in the root directory. It shows that this is set to targeted. SELinux automatically, or by default rather, targets certain services. I don't have the full list here, but there are certain services that it enforces upon. Then the current mode, it's currently in enforcing mode, so it's actually enforcing these rules and the access control. And you see where it says mode from config file, and I know we talked about this last video, but the configuration file is sort of the, for lack of a better term, the persistent or sort of permanent configuration of your system. So it's by default, because of the configuration file set to enforcing, will always be enforcing when you turn it on, unless you change it, which is what I'm going to show you today. So the current mode would be what is currently, the mode it's currently in as you're using your Linux operating system, and the mode from configuration file is what it's set to for persistence. Okay, so let's go ahead and move along from this. Now we know that it's enabled and that it is enforcing mode. So let's take a look at how to change these things. So because this is a security process, you need to use sudo. You need to be elevated, right? So we're going to sudo, we're going to do set and force. Okay, That's the command. Now what setenforce will do, will set either to enforcing, permissive, or disabled. So this is a good point to talk about the difference. Well, it's an enforcing mode, as we see currently. It is enforcing all those policies, all those access controls. If it's in permissive, what'll happen is it'll not deny the services, so it'll allow you to do what you got to do on your system, but it will keep a log of it. It'll still record that that process was attempted so that you can go back into your log files later and take a look. But it will allow you, it's permissive, it's permitting you to go ahead and run that service or whatever. And then last but not least, disabled. Disabled will change your SELinux status from enabled to disabled so that it's just not working at all. Now the caveat to that is this. If you need to disable the service for whatever reason, you can't just go back in and enable it. You have to go into the configuration file that we talked about earlier and change it back to enforcing. And we can do that in a little bit. So let's talk about going from, well, since we're in enforcing, let's go ahead and change it to permissive. So sudo setenforce is the command, and then you want it in permissive mode. Enter, put your password in. Oh. There we go. Now let's find out how to see the status. Do you remember? Yep, SE status. Enter. Now if you look closely, everything's looking the same until you get down to loaded policy name, to current mode, permissive. And then I left both of those outputs on the screen so you can take a look at the difference. So the initial output had current mode enforcing. Now you see it as permissive because we used setenforce to change that. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to disable SELinux, and to do that we will have to go into the actual configuration file. So let's do that. Sudo, and we're going to go ahead and go to use our VI or Nano, whatever editor you like. Etc SELinux config, just like that. You got that? All right. Now remember, we're in VI, so we can actually change this, right? Escape I for insert mode, and it will show you. Of course, we've learned before that these pound signs or hashtags comment out, so that when the file is read, it doesn't read what's here. And you can see the only piece of the file that's being read is right here, the actual value of SELinux. So this is set to enforcing right now, okay? In the configuration file. And if you remember, we saw when we hit setenforce, or excuse me, SE status, that there was a difference between like the local current state and then the configuration state. This is what I mean. In the configuration state, it's set to enforcing persistently. So we want to change that to disabled. It's a matter of just literally taking out the other word and typing in the new one, just like that. We'll keep everything targeted. Escape, WQ, save and quit, like that. Now let's do, well, I like to clear my screen. Now let's do SE status. Okay, and you can see that even though SELinux is enabled on this machine, it's in a disabled mode right now from the configuration. Okay, now let's go ahead and change that back. I do the up arrow for shortcuts. Enter. You can see where it says disabled right there. Go into insert mode, which is escape I. Go back here and let's set this back to enforcing. We want this persistently to be enforcing unless we say otherwise. If we went ahead and saved that last, or rebooted the system on that last, when we disabled it, then it would have been persistently disabled when we log on. Okay. WQ, save, and we're back to where we were. Let's just take a look at status. You can see that SELinux is enabled on this system. It is set to permissive because that's what we did in the beginning with our setenforce. But from the configuration file perspective, it's enforcing right now. So let's go ahead and change it back from permissive back to enforcing, like so. And I got to spell it correctly. And then let's do an SE status, and you can see it's back to enforcing. So 3 modes. Using sudo setenforce, you can go from enforcing to permissive. You can go into the configuration file and disable everything as well. If you have any questions or comments, put them down below and we'll talk more about it. And maybe if I'm feeling up to it, I'll do a part 3 maybe. It's a big maybe.